Ahead, my exclusive interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene, a key McCarthy supporter, on the craziness of that final ballot and her call with Donald Trump. Despite concessions and calamity and endless hours of punditry, the most savvy journalists ask, what do these rebels want? Do they simply thrive on creating chaos? And can the new Republican majority actually govern?
I will always fight to put the American people first, not a few individuals that want something for themselves.
Things got pretty heated as leaders of the Never Kevin movement, such as Colorado's Lauren Boebert, would not budge. But in the end, McCarthy told reporters he'd been right.
How confident are you that you will have this job for a full 2-year term?
1,000%. Thank you all.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Ben Domenech, editor-at-large for TheSpectator.com. And in Los Angeles, Leslie Marshall, the radio talk show host, both are Fox News contributors. Ben, the media kept casting this as an utter debacle for the Republicans, and it certainly was messy. My question is about the 20 holdouts. What did they stand for? What did they really want? Did they want a deal, or did they really just revel in the media attention?
Well, I actually think that they wanted some very specific things, most of which they got. You know, I think that a lot of folks in Washington, myself included, think that they could have gotten there without this kind of display. You know, part of the business of being a legislator is convincing the majority of people within your conference that these are the number of steps that need to be taken in order to make the Congress work right. They were not willing to do that, and instead we had this situation where they showed up in the lobby like Chris Farley and Tommy Boy with a bunch of road flares wrapped around them, and they ended up getting most of what they wanted. Now, but the interesting thing about this coverage was how so many people were getting so many things completely wrong. On CNN, I heard from Jake Tapper and Anderson Cooper the idea that this was a fight over the MAGA agenda. Donald Trump was supporting Kevin McCarthy, and so were the vast majority of Republicans in the conference. I've never heard someone express the MAGA agenda about who gets to be on the steering committee. You know, and so this was a situation where I think the coverage did not actually match the moment, and they also got completely wrong, consistently wrong, the idea that Kevin McCarthy was going to drop out. I said on this network on Wednesday, I thought it would be a long slog, but he had no intention of dropping out and would eventually get there, and that's what happened.
Right. People make these predictions at their own peril. I think eventually it might be about the MAGA agenda, but Leslie, Democrats undoubtedly enjoyed this spectacle. They got their popcorn, you know, but when McCarthy was winning, as I said earlier, 95% of the Republican vote, the headlines were all, McCarthy fails again. How much more of this can he take? But rather than, most of the party backs Kevin, and he was going around saying, if not me, who? There wasn't somebody who had, you know, a block of 150 votes.
Well, it's not a sexy headline to say he has a 95%, and it was historic for him to continue to lose and lose and lose, and it was more than a popcorn and a few margarita moment for Democrats to go, wow, we thought we were fragmented and we couldn't rein in our fringe elements. You know, look at them, we're not the only ones. But the sad thing about this, headline or not, was for the American people. Look, I'm going to go in addition to what Ben said. Yes, they had an agenda, but in addition to that, you have a couple of people, I'm sorry, you have, you know, the Lauren Boeberts and the Matt Getzes, who I feel are attention whores. And the cameras are rolling and the cameras are on them. And one of the things, as you know, that they got what they wanted, which I think is going to be a disaster for the Republican Party, for the House, and for the American people, is that they have the ability to ouster Kevin McCarthy as Speaker pretty much at any time. So any kind of vote that's not going their way, any legislation that, you know, they don't like that's put forth and they don't like the way it's going, you know, they can just say you're out of here. Right. And then one last thing, to talk about MAGA, well, you do have MAGA. Kevin McCarthy thanked former President Donald Trump.
All right, we'll come back to that. And Ben, I want to give you a chance to respond because, first of all, I would say, doesn't the phrase attention whores apply to an awful lot of people in politics, although some may be more in the grandstanding vein than others?
You know, I remember when the most dangerous place between, to be in Washington was between, ex-member and a camera. Exactly. You pick it. It's routine. But one thing that I want to address about this is I actually think at the end of the day, everyone is now invested in Kevin McCarthy's success, with a handful of holdouts being the only exception to that. Because
everyone, including Democrats?
No, everyone in the Republican Party, because Donald Trump is invested in it. He backed him. Obviously, the majority of Republicans who backed him are invested in it. And all the people who cut this deal now need to have him be successful. Because if they are not, if this whole thing goes sideways, then the general lesson will be we can't hold on to any of these rule changes. They're going to go away as soon as we have the opportunity to change them, either in a future Republican Congress or in one where Democrats take control. And then it's like, what did you do all this for if none of this is permanent?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stories today about how this is going to be a disaster, and then the first time the debt ceiling comes up, it's going to be a crisis. Well, that may be true, but let's give them a day or two to see how he governs as Speaker. Leslie, my point about most of America tuning out, because I've tried to explain this to civilians, and it's really hard to explain even to other journalists about voting president and all that stuff. If they're squabbling about who gets the Plum subcommittee assignments and how many members of the Freedom Caucus get to be on the Ways and Means Committee, look, that's as old as politics itself. But it doesn't mean that a lot of people who are tuning in are going to be really invested in this, because it's not like it was a grand battle about health care or tax cuts.
Well, again, this was a slap in the face to the American people, the taxpayer, and even more specifically, people who voted for these Republicans, of which I am a Democrat, did not.
Wait, why a slap in the face?
Sort of like,
why a slap in the face?
Because they did not elect these individuals to waste so many days and so many hours on taxpayer money and time, our dime and time. What did the Republicans want? A Republican, by the way, the Republicans don't want Hunter Biden. What do Republicans want? They want what they believe to be 80,000 IRS agents, which we know is not accurate, but they want specific legislation to be put forth or specific legislation to be changed, overturned, or done away with. And they've lost time. And Republicans pretty much said, look, elect us, we're going to hit the ground running. And that's not what happened. And I think there are a lot of Americans. I had dinner with a couple of Republicans this week, and they are concerned about how the rocky start and how that will go forward and how it could actually benefit my party.
Ben.
Where Leslie is correct is that chaos is not a good look for Republicans.
We can all agree on that.
Everybody can agree on that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that this was anything that actually hurt the taxpayer, and certainly I don't think that Republican voters are going to be all that upset about it. At the end of the day, it matters more that you actually have a speaker as opposed to not having a speaker, and who that speaker is for the vast majority of Americans, whether it was going to be Kevin McCarthy or Steve Scalise or someone else, it doesn't really make that much of a difference to them as long as it was a Republican, which is what they got.
I was saying all along, in 2 weeks, this whole battle will be forgotten. It'll just be like the growing pains at the beginning. It was ugly to watch, no question about it. And Ben, you and I were talking about the C-SPAN had control of the cameras. You could actually see when members were angry and getting in each other's faces. Once the government takes control of the cameras, which happens when the House is sworn in, not a lot of that stuff you do not see. But let me just ask you, Ben, before we move on. McCarthy has, by every account, made a lot of concessions, not just to these snap votes that could push him out of office. You said that the people who came over to his side are now invested in his success, but some of his, even people sympathetic to him or who liked him all along, are saying, well, isn't this pretty much of a weakened speakership?
And I think that that's going to be the real question that we don't know the answer to yet.
Right.
How weakened is he? We're going to find that out over the course of the coming months, and whether this is going to be a short-tenured speakership where you have a motion to vacate by the summer and you have a lot of chaos around it. That's definitely an open question. He is making the judgment call that that's something he can avoid and he can work around. I'm not so sure, but we're going to find out, and I think that this was necessary in terms of what he needed to do in order to, again, get to this point, because the people like Chip Roy, who I've known for 20 years, worked with him on the Senate side years and years ago, they have strong opinions about the way that the House should function, and they wanted to jam it through, and they didn't do it by convincing the other members to go along with it. They did it by engaging in this tactic.
I don't know if the House was so functional beforehand. I mean, no Democrats seemed more organized, but boy, that the last-minute $1.7 trillion vote on it, no enough time to read it business. But Leslie, you brought up Donald Trump earlier. Most of the members who are aligned with McCarthy also backed Trump's claims of a stolen election. But a lot of commentators said, well, when it came down to it, he put up that social media post saying it's time to close the deal for Kevin, and nothing happened. He didn't switch one vote. However, at the end, it seemed like he was making calls and involved. So it's maybe a little too quick to say, well, the former president didn't have much influence?
I really don't think he did have the influence. I'm not just saying that because I'm a Democrat and he's a former president, a Republican president. I'm saying that because, as Ben rightly pointed out at the beginning of this segment, there were specific demands that these people wanted, and there were a couple of things here, and they got their demands, right? One. And two, they still didn't, well, not all of them, but the biggest voices in the crowd, like Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert, they didn't vote for him. Right? They did not put their support behind him, and they got what they wanted. So I think it was more about their list of demands and showing people that a small minority of the party is powerful. They're loud, they're powerful, and they can hold up this process. And I do think that not only weakens the speakership, I do think it's going to weaken this Republican majority.
Well,
and
we
what
shall
they attempt
see.
to do going forward.
And there are also ways to let something go through without actually voting for it. After long resisting Republican taunts that he should inspect the mess at the border himself, President Biden announced the other day that he's doing just that.
Today, my administration is taking several steps to stiffen enforcement for those who try to come without a legal right to stay.
But Biden's timing was off, showing up more than half an hour late and just moments before the Republican-controlled House launched its third day of voting for the next speaker. So CNN and MSNBC bailed on the president. After spending 2 years demanding that Biden visit the border, can media conservatives really dismiss this as a photo op when, after all, most of these trips to the border, either party, are designed to get your message across with the right backdrop?
I think that a lot of that criticism has been placed in the fact that the president it just seems demonstrable of the fact that the president has been ignoring this issue, that he has not been front and center on it, that they've been treating it at arm's length and not really addressing any of the situations that have blown up in their face about it at the White House, including that notorious, whipping incident, that obviously was at the center of conversation for a couple of days before the truth came out. I think that this is really a sad occurrence in the sense that the president has been ignoring this problem even as it's increased to levels that have been unprecedented, particularly with the flow of drugs, from Mexico and from the southern border into our country in ways that are killing so many Americans. I don't think that this trip will make that much of a difference, but it does get rid of that talking point.
Leslie, Biden said in his speech that if the most extreme Republicans continue to demagogue this issue, I'm left with only one choice: to act on my own. How many in the media will say, well, you've been in charge for 2 years with Democratic control of every branch, and things have gotten measurably worse?
I think it depends if that person in the media leans left or right, and if they like President Biden or not, and if it benefits them, with ratings or whatever, to applaud him or to, put him down. I would disagree with Ben on this. I mean, even our own Steve Doocy made a great point, which I agreed with, and which, I was saying, and on my radio program, which is, the Republicans were fighting about who's going to be speaker, and the president's like, I'm going to the border, which I have been screaming for him to do since before he was president, by the way, and when he first got elected, and he should have. But he also is going further and saying, okay, here is my plan, and now Congress has to do the rest. And I think a lot of Americans forget that any president only has so much power with regard to the border, because we do have antiquated amnesty laws, and we do have a really messed up immigration system that needs a massive, reform, a massive overhaul, and only Congress can do that. And both Democrats and Republicans have kicked that can down the road repeatedly, and have not come together and worked on that for the benefit of not just people trying to come into this country, but the American people and the money going into it.
Let me just slip this in, and then you can make your point. To his credit, Michael Shear of the New York Times at a White House briefing quoted advocates for immigrants as saying this is a humanitarian disgrace, and said that this was tougher than anything he'd heard during the Trump years when the border was also a big issue, Ben. So it doesnn't seem like Biden's proposals, even if you take them at face value, are going to do all that much to stem the tide of legal immigration. But is it about taking away the other side's argument that, oh, you haven't been there yet?
I think that it's much more about the latter, unfortunately. And look, I hear time and again from my Democrat friends like Leslie that this is something that Congress needs to solve. They have to come together. They have to do things. Set that aside for the moment. The reality is that we don't have a border at the moment. We do not have enforcement of the existing laws that are on the books, and we have a definition of asylum that has allowed the kind of claims that simply are not justified by this, that is representative of economic movement and not actual fleeing of disaster and the like.
Leslie, a New York Times story on the president's comments did say, pretty low in the story, immigration advocates denounced the new enforcement changes as loudly as they had attacked some of the former president's proposals. So it's not like President Biden's getting a free ride here from the press.
Well, no, and nor should he, or any president. We always talk about, people always perceive that Democrats are so lenient when it comes to immigration and people coming into this country illegally. But just look at the numbers of former President Obama, who was a Democrat, who pretty much was angering, especially the Latino community, on the issue of immigration. And some people are calling this, Obama 2.0, what President Biden is proposing. It's a very specific plan, and there is, again, only so much to Ben's point. Congress controls the purse strings. You want that border that you say that we don't have and more money going there. Congress has to make that happen.
There should be more media focus. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Leslie.